Doctor Who has done it again. Delivered us a fun, exciting sci-fi adventure that was everything we wanted from the show, ruined by a single scene. But unlike its previous episode, The Star Beast, at least Wild Blue Yonder has the good grace to front-load its awful scene, rather than making us wait on tenterhooks. And for the avoidance of doubt, the episode only improves from that point onwards, so much so that I'm not even going to discuss it in any great detail for fear of spoilers. Yes, I would actually recommend watching Wild Blue Yonder as soon as you get to the spoiler section of my review. No, it's not a super special episode, but it's a good mid-season adventure with a Doctor I like. Something we haven't had from Doctor Who in bloody years. Just, if you're watching it for the first time, skip everything before the credits, and ignore all references to Mavity and Isaac Newton. Trust me, they really do add nothing. But the biggest backhanded compliment I could pay to this story is that the first scene felt like it could have been written by a completely different person than who wrote the rest of it. This makes for a complete tonal mismatch. Everything after that scene, well, almost everything, felt like Doctor Who at its best. It took an idea that seems absurd on the face of it and played it absolutely straight. My favorite episodes ever have all done this in some way. Whereas that opening scene with Newton felt like Doctor Who taking the piss out of itself. And not in a good way. It'd be like if that comedy sketch with Davros was included as a pre-credit scene before The Stolen Earth or something. It's hard to feel invested in the outcome of a story if you can't take the first scene of it seriously, which I don't recommend, because the Isaac Newton scene gets even worse if you take it seriously. So what does it do that's so bloody awful I had to make it the focus of this review? Well, for starters, Isaac Newton did not discover gravity, which is exactly what this scene would imply. He also didn't coin the term either. And yes, for those with their hands up at the back, Isaac Newton was English. More specifically, he came from an ethnic group known as White English, otherwise known as English. So my concern for this is twofold. Not only did they make Isaac Newton look foreign, but they also made him look like a bloody idiot. What did the BBC mean by this? Or Bad Wolf or Disney or whoever's paying Russell to write this, my point is, Isaac Newton didn't discover gravity because such a discovery would have been beneath him. And yet, they seemingly go out their way to make him look stupid. Come on, Russell, it's not that difficult to make Indians look smart, and somehow you failed at that. So, after the apple falls on his head and he makes his famous alleged discovery, a flying machine falls out of the ether and knocks down several more apples from the tree. Two people come out of it, introduce themselves as time travelers, make a light-hearted quip about the gravity of the situation, then fuck right off back to the sky. The great scientist wonders not about what propels this marvelous machine, but about the mouthfeel of one of the words that they said. Nor does he seem to give two shits that he's just made contact with alien life. He then proceeds to misremember that word, and then for some reason coins it as the term for his meaningless discovery. Because again, the real Isaac Newton, not this imposter, had better things to do than discover the mere existence of gravity. So, do you want me to let you in on a little secret? I'll tell you who actually discovered gravity. I did. I discovered gravity. But do you know who else discovered gravity? You did. We all discovered gravity as babies, when we lifted our heads for the first time and found that someone or something resists it. The fact that things are being pulled down defines our very concept of down. But I hear some of you say that's not what we mean when we say Newton discovered gravity. He was just the first to come up with a term for it. Fair point, but the word gravity was already in use by Newton's time, both as a force and figuratively for when a situation has emotional weight. So if you did like these characters have done and told a young Isaac Newton he would understand the gravity of the situation, he'd understand the word, yes, but also he'd get the joke. I was going to say that we don't just use terms in physics because some schmuck thought it sounded cool, but then again, I had to fact check that, and it turns out that is the exact reason why we use the term quark. The coiner of the term even mispronounced it, for God's sake. But the Italians who studied gravity a century before Newton were not the first to officially name it. Arguably the ancient Greeks did, although their ideas on gravity were very questionable. Aristotle was a hack, and besides, their word for gravity just meant motion. But this TARDIS wreck of a scene actually got me curious enough to find out who was officially the first to name gravity, and in a truly beautiful twist of fate, that honor really does go to an Indian. He even looks a bit like the guy they got to play Isaac Newton. I legitimately would have liked to see him in the episode instead. I mean, that outfit. We may never know who officially coined the term, but the oldest surviving reference to a word specifically that meant gravity was in a treatise by Brahmagupta 1,000 years before Newton, where he referred to it as that. But again, naming gravity, if indeed he was the first, was hardly his life's greatest achievement. He also charted the skies and derived this formula for a quadratic equation that your maths teacher made you remember. He did incorrectly state that the Earth is the only low thing, but the gravity of other worlds would not be understood until Newton. Which brings me nicely on to, if not gravity, what did Newton actually discover? Well, around the same time that Galileo and others had been investigating the properties of this force, Newton's old buddy Kepler was trying to figure out what made the planets move. He'd got as far as figuring out that their paths around the sun were not a perfect circle. They are ellipses. And for the part of the ellipse that goes a little closer to the sun, it actually gets a little faster. So something about the sun must be controlling the planet's motion. It was Newton who figured out that the force that makes the apple fall and the force that keeps the planets in motion are the same thing. He'd found a unifying theory that describes both the Earth and the heavens, with the simple idea that masses attract each other. He even found a way to calculate it. So for example, this apple falling down to Earth, replace m1 with the mass of the Earth in kilograms, replace m2 with that of the apple, r would be the distance to the center of the Earth in meters, and g is always 0. Lots of zeros, 6674. Work through the maths and you get 1.96 newtons of force. There's a reason why the unit is named after him. But it doesn't specify a direction. You could swap M1 and M2 and still get the same result. That's because it really does go both ways. The apple pulls back on the Earth with the same amount of force, which you only don't notice because it's spread across the entire planet. Newton would go on to figure out that this applies to all things, that every single force in the universe goes both ways, from the recoil of a gun to the rising of the tide. So I hope you enjoyed this science tangent as much as I did. You can probably see now how there's so much more to Newton than, haha, apple go down, and just how much this episode does him a disservice. And if that weren't bad enough, the inclusion of Isaac Newton somehow manages to drag down the quality of the episode even when he isn't on screen. So, shortly after crash landing, this time on a spaceship, Donna, a married woman might I add, remarks out of nowhere that Isaac Newton was hot. The Doctor responds in kind, signaling to the audience and to himself that he likes men. Now, I'm sure one could argue it's completely in character that the Doctor is gay, bisexual, or whatever, but this episode fails to make a case for it. I'm sorry, they just tell us the Doctor is gay by having him act extremely out of character. Like, can you even imagine the Doctor talking about a woman this way? He's fallen from women before, yes, but never have those feelings been purely physical, meaning attraction to her face and or body. Maybe this is consistent with how Russell intends to characterize the Doctor when he's played by Ncuti Gatwa, but that only further emphasizes how different Gatwa's take on the character is from anything we've had before. As a reminder, the Doctor in the classic series was only ever characterized as asexual. That he'd even have a romantic option at all was something added to the new series by Russell T Davies the first time around, and at least then it made sense. The Doctor falling for Rose wasn't just a thing that happened because she was hot. She was what allowed him to see some hope in the world at a time when he'd lost almost everything. But the way I see it now, it's almost looking like Russell only introduced the ideas of romance and sexuality to the Doctor Who universe so that the character may later be characterized as queer once such a thing becomes acceptable. In other words, the Doctor being straight was really only a foot in the door for him to be gay later on. But now that we come to the spoiler section of the review, let's talk about what made this episode sing. Because despite all the bad stuff, I really got a sense of peril for these characters being trapped at the edge of the universe without a TARDIS, not even a sonic screwdriver. Donna has risked her life before with the Doctor, but this time felt different, which was evoked so beautifully in her speech about the family she'd be leaving behind. The cosmic horror creepiness of the Not Things made them a worthwhile adversary, and the fact that they used the Doctor's intelligence against him was a nice touch. The use of language in the story was inspired. I really want to see alien languages more often. This should happen every single time the TARDIS goes away. And let's talk about that ending, because I'm long past the era where I could genuinely fear for the characters' lives when watching an episode of Doctor Who, but against all odds, Wild Blue Yonder brought it out of me. The Doctor has mere seconds to decide which one is the real Donna. And by this point, the Not Things have grown so adept at imitating their targets that they would react with realistic distress when one of them is left behind. So when Donna screams out that you've got the wrong one, don't leave me here, you actually don't believe her at first, and then it's with creeping horror that you see the other Donna in the TARDIS making leering, creepy expressions and realize the real Donna has only a few seconds left to live. The approaching wall of fire is going to be the last thing she ever sees, and it seems I was not the only one who thought this was how she was going to die. She only had one more episode left after this. Maybe she was going to be replaced by the Not Thing for some, if not all of that story. So hats off to my arch nemesis, Russell. Don't drop the T, Davis. You actually pulled through with this story. It almost feels uncharitable to say that the way it was dealt with afterwards was a bit contrived. The Doctor noticing that Donna's arm was 60 micrometers longer than it should have been? Like, seriously? You pick up on that and not the extremely more obvious signs? Also, human limbs can't be measured that precisely because they're made of too many squishy bits. And that the Doctor somehow knew to use this ejector bridge despite having zero time to familiarize himself with this TARDIS layout. But even then, that iconic visual of the police box flying off from the exploding wreckage just made me grin. And I think I'll leave it there. There are two more things I'd like to talk about, but they both come up again next episode, and I'd kind of like to leave this one on a high. I'll see you in the new year. Stay positive. Remember to love with one heart, hate with the other. And until we meet again, I bid you good night.
I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement.